excited about. Let me begin by introducing myself. My name is Victoria Mora, and I'm the Vice President for Advancement here at St. John's in Santa Fe. And I'd like to join my other colleagues who, over the last couple of days, have thanked you all for being here. It's a wonderful joy for us to have all of you join us on our campus to talk about something that everybody in this room knows to be so important and worthwhile and worth our attention. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you not only two of my most accomplished St. John's colleagues, but also two colleagues from whom I have learned so much about books, the liberal arts, and liberal education. This is no small statement at a college where liberal education is alive and thriving, and where collegiality requires more than lip service. It also happens that these individuals are two of my dearest friends at the college. Peter, since fall 1992, when he became my first seminar partner as I joined the teaching faculty at St. John's. And Eva, since she walked into my office in the summer of 2006, when I began my service as dean of the Santa Fe campus. Peter offered not only his intellectual friendship from day one, a friendship that has grown over the years as we've read everything from Plato to most recently Proust together, but also a personal friendship that has included our ability to talk about the most important matters, the ones that are located at the convergence of the philosophical and the personal. Eva entered my office as a former dean of the Annapolis campus, offering her wisdom and thoughtful reflections on the role of dean, for which I was bracing myself with fear and trembling. I knew we'd become friends when she called me out publicly in a lecture standing right at this podium, in a standing room only crowd. And what she called me out on was for my having removed Plato's Sophist from that year's reading list. I felt like a naughty child with that delicious sense of pride for having been noticed in my naughtiness by someone I admired so much. Since then, Eva and I can't seem to manage to hold our conversations to under 3 or 4 hours. With both Peter and Eva, I am always guilty of engaging in much too loud laughter, which I take to be one of the highest expressions of friendship. These friends are remarkably accomplished. Each has taught across the St. John's program, which encompasses the 7 liberal arts as well as the sciences. Eva Brann, in addition to being a former dean of the Annapolis campus from 1990 through 1997, is also the college's longest-serving tutor from 1957 right into the present. Eva received her BA from Brooklyn College in 1950, her MA in Classics from Yale University in 1951, and her PhD in Archaeology, also from Yale, in 1956. She holds an honorary doctorate from Middlebury College and was made an honorary alumna of St. John's in 2008. She is a 2005 recipient of the National Humanities Medal. The titles of her books offer a glimpse into her simultaneously thoughtful and playful intellect and imagination. What then is time? The ways of naysaying, no, not, nothing, and non-being. Homeric moments, clues to delight in reading the Odyssey and the Iliad. The music of the Republic, essays on Socrates' conversations and Plato's writings. Open secrets, inward prospects, reflections on word and soul, and feeling our feelings, what philosophers think and people know. Peter Pesic, physicist, historian, and pianist, is emeritus tutor and musician in residence at St. John's College, Santa Fe. He received his AB and MS at Harvard University in 1969 and 1970, respectively. He was awarded the PhD at Stanford in 1975. His expansive intellectual interests and accomplishments are expressed in his prolific publications since 2000, some of which have been translated, maybe all of which, have been translated into several languages. Labyrinth, A Search for the Hidden Meaning of Science, Seeing Double, Shared Identities in Physics, Philosophy, and Literature, Abel's Proof, an essay on the sources and meaning of mathematical unsolvability, Sky in a Bottle, and Music and the Making of Modern Science, just recently published now in 2014. Peter is the recipient of the 2005 Piano Prize, the 2012 Price Webster Prize, and the 2013 Joseph H. Hazen Education Prize. He is also a fellow of the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation and of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. In addition to his writing and lecturing across the globe in recent years, Peter is also now an associate in the Department of Physics at Harvard University. Eva will talk to us today about immediacy, and Peter about wonder, difficulty, and understanding. Please join me in welcoming these exceptional friends and colleagues.
Thank you all, and thank you, Victoria. And I might add to the story that she told after I had upbraided her and ordered her to put it back on. I looked at trepidation at where she was sitting, and she was doubled up in laughter. I want to steal 4 minutes of my talking time to speak of the role that the Santa Fe campus has played in my life. I remember vividly the atmosphere around its founding in the years before 1964, but only confusedly the arguments pro and con, though among the latter, one worry was predominant. Were we overextending ourselves? It was a reasonable worry, because our president's plan, reported on page 6 of his book, The Colonization of a College, in 1985, here is what Dick Weigel said. I elaborated a quixotic plan for 6 St. John's colleges, strategically located throughout the United States. It was a vision in equal parts exhilarating and terrifying. When I used to bowl across the continent in my little blue Beetle to assume my teaching duties in the early graduate institute at Santa Fe, I would sometimes take the northern, sometimes the southern route, and imagine 3 colleges of Johnny Empire strung across the top, 3 across the bottom of the United States, or even 6 lined up diagonally along the legendary Route 66. Yet, the question was, were 6 St. John's 4 or 5 too many for this world? Doubt about the feasibility of many colleges turned into the light with the actuality of one new one, as the colony turned into a sister college. Siamese sisters, as it seemed to me, 2 bodies with one soul, separate existences with one essence, separable only on pain of death for one or the other. As time went on, the myth-making that arises in real communities proceeded. Annapolis, locked in by its East Coast creeks, was over-intense and hyper-intellectual. Santa Fe, expansive under southwestern skies, was laid back and loose-minded, in touch with Native American wisdom, while Annapolis was dominated by a bunch of stuffy Teutons. I was wonderful. A latecomer. Quite a few of these Central Europeans had in fact found refugees welcome in Maryland. It was the kind of spirited nonsense by which incipient communities develop what's called their identities. The wonderful truth was that the program had traveled so well, had shown itself so safely beyond a time and a place, that the conversation was just the same in the wide Southwest as in the constricted Mid-Atlantic. Not a boring same, but an exhilarating same, like Cleopatra, of whom it is said that age cannot wither her nor custom stale her infinite variety. Meanwhile, I had my private mythology, since every place that has some atmosphere resonates with cognate visions. From my balcony on the lower campus, I could see the then more magically defined Sirius in the distance, and close up, the territorial architecture of the campus, To my Aegean imagination, in its light columns and bright courtyards, it bore a resemblance to King Minos' palace in Cretan Knossos, which harbored the thrilling mystery of the labyrinth and its minotaur. That's how your campus felt to a visitor from Samasaki, Annapolis. So now, from autobiography to my real matter, immediacy. Sometimes I think that this quality, which I'm about to delineate, is our deepest, most defining characteristic. I imagine that we could remain ourselves, although we lost in turn every element of our program of learning, if only we saved that mode of being. But then again, it seems to me that this directness of ours is best, perhaps even exclusively served by the pedagogic practices and the programmatic materials that we do in fact employ. So I'm in this respect in my most frequent state, that of thinking out of both sides of my mind, so to speak. Not of my brain, I hasten to say, because that's an improbable activity. This is how I frame the question for myself. What is our central good, and are there alternative ways of achieving it? The second part of the question is open in theory, though in practice we could want to jettison, so who would want to jettison so well-working a way of teaching and so coherent a plan of learning? As for the first part, what is our central virtue? I think the history of the St. John's program gives a clue. Like any mature community, we have accumulated and are bound by masses of customs, practices, rules. But we are very unlike most institutions, and having divested ourselves of more and more intellectual inhibitions as we went. You might say that we have become more radical as we age, not in the sense of more incendiary, but in the sense of closer to the roots, in my terms, more immediate. Here's an example. In the first, the 1937-1938 bulletin of the program, written by its intellectual founder, Scott Buchanan, the great books list was, as is academic convention, ranged under rubrics. Thus Homer and the Old Testament came under the rubric of language and literature. Now, if you think about it, this classification intervenes between the book and the reader with a strong dose of meddling opinion. It shields the student from the fact that Homer was thought of by the Greeks as their prime theologian, and that the Hebrew Bible presents itself as the history of a people and their God. I don't mean to disparage Scott Buchanan, whose educational originality is beyond dispute, but we've eradicated the vestiges of conventional intermediation, which were, I imagine, under his radar in those exciting days. There are any number of small ways in which we've become more immediate. I'll give one more example. In the early days, historical significance was often attached to the fact that our seminar is largely ordered chronologically. Terms such as medieval, Renaissance, the modern mind were still used. For most of us, this temporal order is now simply a practical device. Later books often refer to preceding ones, as Newton uses Euclidean propositions. We don't put a scholar-devised designation on books, but we read them directly. Our context is not interpretative backgrounding and scholarly introduction, but what you might call the quarreling, contemporaneous brotherhood of great books. Let me take a moment here for a word on great books, a term our clueless advisors tell us to jettison. To my mind, category whose members are truly discontinuous with other perfectly good books. There is no ultimate difficulty about listing the criteria, which require, however, not so much discernment as longevity to discern, since the chief characteristics take a lifetime to become evident. Opposition to greatness comes, I'm convinced, from a kind of irrational irritation that made the Athenians ostracize Aristides because they were tired of hearing him called the just, or from egalitarian resentment, or, this one I have real sympathy for, from fear of the demands things of quality make on us. Back to the context. It is an academic habit to insulate works of stature from students and the students from them by packing them in the cottonwood of backgrounding lectures and introductory readings. And since the students' valuable time has been thus preempted, teachers then make up for that by reducing original texts to selected snippets or reproducing them as travesties by paraphrased abstracts. Add to this the emergence of theories of interpretations so sophisticated as to make an innocent approach to these books seem very simple-minded. Well, we don't occupy students' time or prevent access to books by delivering pre-masticated versions of their settings or meanings. As far as I can tell, we have only one interpretational maxim. A cat may look at a king. That's from an old adage that dates to 1652. Our royal texts can be confronted by any considering intelligence, feline or human. I think most members of the scholarly communities, students, tutors, alumni, friends, will readily recognize this immediate relation to books as our very particular way. It carries with it certain opportunities, even obligations, that less direct approaches forego or even forbid. Chief of these is the question practically proscribed in most classrooms. Is this treatise of reasonings true in the existent world? Is this work of fiction true in the imaginative realm? Now, in educating our students and ourselves in this so natural and yet so misprized a way, we actually do, I think, tiny as we are, help to repair a more global loss. To explain that, allow me to return for a moment to autobiography. When I came to this college in 1957, Jacob Klein was its dean, its third dean in the new program. In Winfrey Smith's A Search for a Liberal College, 1983, a fine history of the beginning of the new program, we will find a letter Yasha wrote to his future wife, Dodo, in 1938, after a few weeks at the college. This is what he says. It is exciting to see how over centuries and oceans, unspoiled boys, most of them were then men, are impressed by Plato. They read with a directness that is sometimes frightening. I walked around the first days drunk with happiness. I know all about this blissful inebriation. It was the same when I came, something short of a score of years later. Eventually, I sobered up into the stable state that Aristotle would recognize as happiness, an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue. In short, I did some real work. But my point here is the directness that Mr. Klein mentions. There is a long and deep story behind this directness, and it is, in fact, the history behind this talk on immediacy. Generally speaking, I'm not much for hanging on to your teachers for too long. Our students should take off on their own. I was never anyone's teacher, says the greatest of them, with teacherly irony, as a lesson to us tutors. That's Socrates in the Apology. But let this be one of those permissible moments of grateful memory. Jacob Klein wrote a book that was eventually republished by Dover as a classic. Its subject was the origin of Western algebra in a great mathematical revolution at the beginning of modernity. The work was quite specifically technical, but it could be interpreted to have a very wide resonance. The loss of immediacy that made modern times so superlatively efficient in some respects, and so sadly soul deficient in others. I will try to say in a word what this indirectness, this loss of immediacy that has captured us moderns consists of. We tend to see and approach our lives and the world through a screen of concepts, techniques, and symbols. We focus on means rather than ends, formalisms rather than substance, media rather than content. This last displacement from content to media is having its era of frenzy at the moment, when the interest in speed and variety of delivery is no longer in finite proportion to the quality and interest of the message. So you can see that my view of the college is indebted to this book, or rather to my appropriation of it. Now it happens to belong to the human condition to be born as frighteningly direct babies, and to be capable of retaining this immediacy, or to recover through boy and girlhood, and even in old age. To me, our college is one agent of this recovery, this renaissance of immediacy. Let me raise them through other elements of reborn immediacy that seem to me to characterize us to the benefit of humanity. My first item was that we, tutors and students, do not prematurely let applied interpretations intervene between us and the books we've chosen to study. There's a second kind of intervention that we cancel: time. The past we admit into our program has not passed. It is now an ingredient in our being, our ground. Human beings who live only in the latest now, in the modal, Latin for just now, the adverb from which modernity is made, are ungrounded, racing heedless and footloose through non-life, mistaking exultation for happiness and quantity for reality. So inversely, have the folk on the other side, the reactionaries, who are stuck in the sort of past that has passed, that is truly dead and gone, turned a ground into a grave. Our study then is that living past which reaches right into the present. It lives in what may be called the tradition, the works, the great books that are both inexhaustibly interesting in themselves and the explanatory ground of our present. Not to know the tradition is to become the helpless victim of circumstance, while to have some familiarity with it is to gain awareness. And to be aware is to abrogate tyrannical time and to master dominating circumstances by living in the world immediately, not divided from it by opaquely unassimilated inheritances and pointlessly smart innovations. Now I think that those who inspect us through conventional categories, to them we appear to have a powerful institutional method and a strong implicit presupposition. For to an ideology-ridden world, what is really natural appears very contrived. To my mind, we have the most minimal preconceptions and are therefore as simple, you might say, as deliberately naive in our ways as can be. I mean institutionally. Most of my colleagues and students as well are replete with ingenious takes on who we are. It seems to me that our direct and time-subverting approach to the works of civilization implies, besides the maxim that a cat may look at the king, just one more precept: origins are significant. Here we call to aid our Greek word, arche. It turns up in slews of English words, from archangel to archfiend, from archaeology to archetype, from archaeopteryx to matriarch, that is to say chief angel, principal devil, antiquarian study, original model, ruling mother. So arche means what is first, old, original, chief, and governing. And arche is a beginning that rules. That there are such beginnings is a faith that our program expresses. It betokens our replacement of chronological history. That is, to be sure, a potent opinion, ever in need of intelligent defense, but it is not an ideology in the current understanding, meaning a body of theory implying a political agenda. We keep our classrooms free of current politics, not only to protect our students from their teachers' private preoccupations, but even more to provide them with one venue where they can think about personal and political problems deeply and directly, unobstructed by the foggy drifts of current passion. I've just used the word teacher. In his last public appearance, Socrates, one of the program's master teachers, tells his Athenians a semi-truth that I've already cited. I was never ever anyone's teacher, never ever purported. We tutors might say the same, and it would not be just a pretty pretense. Institutions of higher learning are usually staffed by professors who are distanced from their students by the authority of their expertise. The faculty of this college cannot pretend to such authority. We are intentionally and irremediably out of our depth. This is not only because our program of studies requires us to teach outside of our graduate training and professional competence. That's the least of it. But because we require ourselves and our students to delve into depths that are beyond most of us much of the time. That's because we demand seriousness of them as of ourselves, and the realm of learning as distinct from performance, in the realm of learning as distinct from the realm of performance, seriousness begins just where competence ends. This kind of non-professional pedagogy, which engages more in eliciting thinking than in delivering answers, which regards the expression, I don't know, more as a sign of intellectual virtue than an admission of deficiency, which respects well-framed questions more than facile answers, draws tutors and students together. There's a genuine equality in the face of great matter, which we express in the formality of our mutual address. Our classrooms are venues for conversation, a Latin word that, as I construe it, means turn and turnabout conversation. All take their turn when the Spirit is upon them. We do not stand on academic ceremony, such as hand-raising protocol or professional primacy. We all participate spontaneously, and what matters is what is said, not who says it. And behold, and thus addressing ourselves to the matter, the individual humanity of the participants in the inquiry begins really to shine forth. These four are probably our chief immediacies: unmediated reading of texts, time-disencumbered absorption of the tradition, theoretically unobstructed approaches, and unembarrassed relations between tutors and students. They imply all sorts of pedagogic ways, their direct fallout. So there's a slew of intermediacies, some of which are now raced through. They're all involved with each other. To value utility is to raise means over ends. It is the antithesis of immediacy. Aristotle first defined liberal learning as something done, at least in part, for its own sake, rather than as a means for use. He says that in politics and again in the metaphysics. Its opposite is what is termed vocationalism, the degradation of a beautiful word, for vocation means a calling, a summons to a mission. Our program of learning is unabashedly non-vocational, non-instrumental, though that is a toxic admission under present circumstances. That much the louder should we proclaim our educational radicalism. Vocationalism turns joyful learning into toilsome training and relocates the pleasure of the college years from study to extracurricular activity. Thus, it puts an intervening preparatory period between young adults and the reality of life. 4 years of deflected seriousness and deferred fulfillment, when the strenuous leisure of higher education ought to be as immediately real as anything in later life. We do mitigate the off-putting radicalism of an education that is its own end by pointing out that isn't much of real life, so also for our program. The unintended consequences work the effects. In our case, these incidental outcomes are serendipitous. Our students are particularly well prepared to navigate the knowledge economy of our time and to protect their happiness in a world fixated on means to the detriment of ends. And I might add, on the dilution of thoughtfully passionate engagement into slapday preferential liking. An acute critic of the program might object, but in having revived, as you do, the medieval trivium and quadrivium, and organizing liberal education by means of liberal arts, which are skills, haven't you actually committed yourself to a training in means? Since such know-how seems to be not an end, but a means to an end, we would answer that we never teach mere skills or methods. We have no courses in the so-called scientific method, or in mathematical thinking, or in the writing process. We exemplify each approach by its finest destination, each process by its most elegant product, each skill by its most beautiful result. We keep doing and deed immediately together. Study the ways of physical science through their most crucial theories, the ways of mathematics through their most elegant theorems, the ways of expression through their most moving products. In short, we rarely engage in mere training exercises, but keep how and what in close connection. Our concomitant immediacy implies that we rarely require our students to collect published information or compile secondary opinions. Be it in speaking or in writing, we want them to approach some important matter directly. as the cat looks considerately at a king. That means that we expect them to be independently critical, but not so much in the mode of, quote, questioning everything, unquote, as of asking questions. Thus, it is not standoffish, corrosive criticality we look for, but a reverent and often corroborative criticality, the sort that expresses close, respectful engagement. Finally, in general, we try to forego mere formalisms. Instead, we direct all our customs and rules to some articulated good. In that spirit, our so-called administrative offices and officers stay true to their designation. They minister to our program. We have only a minimal bureaucracy. It is a word that literally means the might of offices. A domination that separates a community from its purpose by introducing the notion of power. Competition is only marginal to our learning, so power is not a mode of our governance. For as competition and learning displaces attention to the actual object, so power and governance usurps compliance with trusted authority. I could make a long list of other immediacies and take a long time to report them, so I'll put an end to it now. There's one addendum, however. In reading over what I've written, I see that what I really mean by immediacy is humanity. So now I'll put it to myself and to you, not very humbly, but I think truly. It is the care of our college to maintain the ways of humanity. Thank you.
I moved to change my title of my talk really as a result, partly of hearing your speech and of hearing many things, wonderful and remarkable things that have been said during the course of this conference. Maybe I could begin by continuing exactly at the point where you have taken us, Eva, which is the contemplation of this immediacy, which I guess I would like to name as wonder, a kind of wonder, which I think expresses the childlike quality, the directness, the lack of intermediate sources or authorities. And it puts me in mind that wonderful quote of Baudelaire when he says that genius is nothing more nor less than childhood recovered at will. And so it seems to me that what we are doing here, very humbly, but I think also very truly, is in some sense a school of genius. And that the students that come to us, or to the liberal arts in general, not only to this college, are finally or should be animated by some desire in that childlike way, which is the essence of genius itself, to reapprehend and to reapproach things anew. It seems to me that this, I hope to illuminate a question, a very deep question that surfaced a number of times during the conversations. How is it possible for me to understand what I do not understand? It seems to me this wonder is, as Eva so beautifully said, the essential beginning of that process, as Aristotle told us so long ago. I would like to address this especially in the context of what seems to be one of the most, perhaps the boldest aspects of the project of this college, which was to abolish a boundary which has periodically surfaced in the course of these discussions, that is between the humanities and sciences, who have at times glared at each other none too friendlily, as a result of the tension between them. I would like to speak about that because it seems to me one of the most bold initiatives of this college has been to include laboratory mathematics and music too, whom I regret has been too little spoken of in our discussions as essential parts of this education. It seems to me that an example of this might take us back to the theme of the origin of genius, the origin of original thought, was that St. John's College was, I think, in one of its manifestations, was the first dated back to ancient times, and to Socrates himself, was reinvented by a young man named Albert Einstein and two of his friends, who in 1903 formed what they called the Olympia Academy, in which they met together to read Racine, Dostoevsky, Helmholtz, Riemann, Poincaré. They were sick of the education that they had received, a very rigorous one, no doubt, at the best institutions of their time, and they decided that now their real education would begin immediately as friend to friend in a conversation that was direct and untrammeled. They met every week to read these books. If they were lucky, they could order a boiled egg. They were that poor. But their conversations were, I'm sure, a source of great joy. We know that Einstein remembered that academy above all the other pompous academies that he had ever known in his life. It was the one that had most formed and shaped him and moved him, the source of lifelong friendships, but also, I think, of some of his own deepest ideas. It's with that in mind that I'm also pleased to be able to announce that the college has just approved a new science institute that will happen in the summers that's meant to allow visitors to the college, high school teachers, but also people that are interested in science that want a week of intensive work with texts and experiments in the way that we do it. In the past years, we've done Newton's optics and the origins of field theory, especially Faraday in this way, and these have been joyous and very, very productive occasions. So I'm very happy to have this talk be a kind of inauguration of this new institute, which I hope will prosper. Part of the beauty of the inclusion of science, which I want to speak about in a number of ways, is that it has to do with the presence of phenomena. Here's our phenomenon. Phenomenon of the day. I mean, there's some way in which that spark that appears before us has a power that rivals or maybe exceeds any text, in the way that the living presence of music commands our attention and our thought in a way that takes the discussions that we're taking more than the discussions of tastes and even of a text and even of taste, because in the face of such a phenomenon, or in the face of the blue sky that's outside, we realize that we're confronting something that won't answer to our notions of taste and that commands our attention in a certain way. I would like to try to offer, I think, a helpful analogy about what is going on between modern science and the quadrivium. A number of very interesting talks I've heard have tried to include mathematics among the natural science among the liberal arts. It seems to me there's a juster and simpler realization, which I would like to say, which is simply that modern science is the child, or the children of the quadrivium. That is, what we're dealing with here is a familial situation, that it isn't right to sort of push them all together as if they were all one thing, but they do have a profound relation, which is, I think, both cordial and periodically very fraught, even perhaps edible or incestuous at other times. And I think if you think anything about your relationship with your parents or with your children, you will see that this is somehow bears thinking about some more. In the book that Victoria mentioned, I've tried to show in the ways in which music in particular, one of those four sisters, along with arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy, had a decisive effect on the formation of modern science, as it did, of course, originally on the formation of ancient science, and that allowed the mediation of things that were invisible but were audible as a kind of model of the way in which what was not visible and palpable to human understanding might be understood. And then music also was the place in which experiment entered philosophy, because really we should recall that what we now call modern science was called for centuries simply philosophy, perhaps qualified as natural philosophy. Michael Faraday didn't like the then newfangled word physicist or scientist, only coined in the 1830s. They were, and they thought of themselves as philosophers, and in that sense they were following the ancient model in which for Plato, the trivium, the quadrivium were the school, the essential preparation for the philosophic life. So in that sense too, the children, however unruly they may have become later on, do in some sense bear a very complex, conflicted fate with their parents, the liberal arts. This is essential. This is also extremely important in that the children, like so many children, went in a different direction from the parents, whereas ancient science and Aristotle had been something in which nature was immediately available to our senses, and we indeed were congruent to it. Modern science took the Heraclitean turn in which nature was essentially hidden, in which we were trying to understand an order which was hidden, and if Heraclitus is to be believed, more beautiful, more powerful, because hidden. But this turn, it gives rise to the second element, which I think I would like to add to the element of wonder, which is it leads to difficulty. It leads to all kinds of difficulties in understanding how to make the invisible visible, how to make what is incomprehensible, like atomic explanations, comprehensible to the mind. After all, Aristotle was able to dismiss atomic theory by a wonderful joke, in which, one of his few jokes, but a memorable one, in which he said, to explain the manifest qualities of the world that we see in terms of obscure, incomprehensible, invisible entities, was to him nothing less than simply funny. It was the mark of people that didn't understand that explanation meant taking something obscure and making it clear, not taking something clear and making it obscure. And very brilliant. The trouble was that the hiddenness of nature, as the children realized, gave rise to forms of explanation and power that were, in a sense, essential and couldn't be let aside. In the same way that confronting a spark like this commands our attention, and it seems to call our attention to a world of invisible charged forces that lies behind the visible spark that we must then interrogate, however difficult it may be for us to do so. Now, in confronting difficulty, it seems to me that the second essential step has been made. First, there has to be a kind of romance. There has to be the sense of wonder that draws one in. Otherwise, one wouldn't ever care. The second stage is more difficult. It is, in fact, difficulty itself. It is the struggle that all of us go through, and our students, and really everybody in the world, to understand, especially these concepts of modern science and mathematics, whose difficulty is not acknowledged. And it seems to me one of the college's great and enduring insights is that the difficulties that many people have, starting in childhood with algebra, with modern science, are not a sign of weakness or feeble intelligence or bad training, but in fact of the unconscious awareness of deep philosophic difficulties that deserve attention. Textbooks habitually, and as a matter of practice, cover over these difficulties to say, algebra is not so difficult. You shouldn't feel any difficulty. Quantum physics is not so difficult. They are difficult, and the college has raised up the difficulty as an essential part of what happens in the classes, because, like music itself, we perform these mathematical theorems. We perform the experiments. We perform all of these things, the students above all performing them for us, for each other, and for all of us, are in the midst of trying to grasp what is the difficulty and to give the difficulty some kind of shape and name. That is, to form it into a question. So this acknowledgement, it seems to me, is not just a kind of pedagogical means of calming people, it's a way of facing the deepest philosophical problems of our time, which I think are not adequately covered by Edwin Husserl's term sedimentation, which has been very important to the college. The image of sedimentation is a kind of dignified geological picture in which there are strata that lie below the surface, safely hidden from us, and there has to be a kind of excavation, a kind of archaeology that must go on to bring them to light. But in fact, the truth is far ruder and more irregular. That is, these strata erupt into our awareness constantly and all the time. They do not remain buried. The difficulties that people experience trying to understand modern science and mathematics in particular, not to speak of all the difficulties of human life that are raised by poetry and philosophy, these difficulties are the evidence that the strata are not buried but are re-emergent constantly. Perhaps our advantage is that we are aware and prepared to try to adjust ourselves to these and try to find out what is required of us, what it might mean to understand. Now, the word understanding itself, like believing, as Professor Ricks remarked just yesterday, is a word somehow that we then become aware is fluid and malleable. I mean, perhaps the deepest reason why we can't understand the things which we can understand is that we ourselves are porous beings, that ideas, feelings of all sorts are flowing in and out of us at all times. And so that sense of what we can and can't believe, what is us and what is not us, is not a fixed and permanent boundary. And in fact, as we start to confront what it means that I say now that I don't understand algebra, I don't understand Newton's physics, then starts to raise a kind of process in which we realize a certain price must be paid. That is, I might not be able to understand it naively in the way that I first thought when in wonder I approached the subject, but that it might be possible for me to change the world, not in the sense of a paradigm shift, which seems to be also a fundamentally misleading idea, because it seems to neglect the ways in which our understanding is drawing back on other earlier understandings, on the understandings of other people, as opposed to being bored without any such connections. But we're aware, for instance, I'm remembering something from my own life, trying to understand Newton's idea of forces. I realized at a certain point that it wasn't true that all the objects in the world had arrows sprouting out of them the way they did in Newton's world. That was a representation. That was a certain map of understanding. And at that point, I realized if I were willing to pay the price of copying the entire world in a kind of mental Xerox, and then using that as a representation with which the arrows and other things could then function to guide the Newtonian understanding, then it would make more sense. The mistake, the trouble I've been having as a young student was to think that somehow that naive world and in the world of Newtonian understanding somehow should be the same thing. Pulling them apart, which is a certain kind of price that has to be paid, then allowed me suddenly to start to think about what it could be. So we were ready not only to understand understanding, whatever that project is, which involves a fluid reconception of what different understandings might be, which seems to be still very much in progress and still, among the physicists I know, still, a very live and urgent philosophical question. It seems to me also that this issue of difficulty is raised by a story that I love about Pavlovian experiments. The classic Pavlovian experiment is to ring a bell and give the dog dinner and ring a buzzer and shock them. And of course, the obvious step that was taken is to ring the bell and the buzzer at the same time. Most dogs become extremely neurotic, not knowing whether they're about to receive dinner or a shock. A few dogs become deconditioned at this point. The scales fall from their doggy eyes, and they see what's been done to them. I think probably with some resentment. They have been enriched and deceived. I suppose they've become bad dogs in some sense, but they are philosophic dogs of a new sort, and they are capable of addressing the difficulties of their condition, now no longer simply believing that the signals to which they had been subjected all their lives were more than representations. It seems to me that the question of understanding evolves also on a question of how is it possible for us to endure the states of cognitive dissonance, of perplexity, of overwhelmment that rightly come over us and that are deeply our due and are essential to to the philosophic process. It seems to me that this devolves on what I think is the ultimate work of the college, which is the teaching of courage through a kind of practice of fortitude and patience in the face of these great difficulties. Perhaps it's not quite the physical courage that was familiar to the ancients, who had to deal with far more pain and with the hazards of war far more than we do. But perhaps for that reason we need courage all the more. And it seems to me in that way, by drawing closer to these sources through wonder and confronting difficulty and dealing with the problem of understanding, that St. John's College has offered something like a school of genius. Thank you.
So I'm going to open this right up to questions because I know you want to hear from our two speakers. So maybe we could just start with Ms. Brann, since we started with Ms. Brann, and then maybe we could just go back and forth, if that makes sense, between the two speakers, and then maybe we'll get a conversation going. Questions?
Thinking of in the theme of courage in bold statements, as we're gathered here to, I guess, contemplate the defense of the liberal arts and liberal education, I'm wondering how this message of immediacy and genius and courage might translate into a way forward to engage with other institutions. Can you comment on where this might take us?
We do often get invited to go to other colleges, not very often universities. They're big and proud. But to small schools, we're trying hard to keep hold of something they feel slipping away, or to reinstitute something they've already lost. So in some cases, it's people going places and giving a description of how it works. The most persuasive thing I can think of is when visitors come to classes. They're almost always amazed. I've been in seminars which I thought were kind of so-so. And the visitors just thought they were observing miracles of that. So we going out, people coming in, people writing things, and above all, our alumni who are invited to visit and make speeches to organizations, to clubs, and they do it not only as a recruiting way, but they also do it to let the public know about what it means to be liberally educated. Now, there's an obligation in that, which is when the alumni go out to advocate liberal education, they should be good examples. Which is to say, they shouldn't talk in too complicated a way, and they should make an opportunity to listen and respond. Those are ways. There are other ways.
Maybe to that, I'll just add. I mean, I think there's a considerable amount of curiosity over the years in universities also about the college. And I had the opportunity recently of trying to do something of our classes at Harvard for the faculty and for a group that include everybody from freshmen to senior professors, and it was a very interesting occasion, not without its stresses, because the notion of difficulty is a trying notion if you're trying to minimize it or feel that you've mastered it, as a professor would. But there was a way, I recall one student saying in the course of this, why don't we do this all the time? I mean, asking their professors this question as if to realize, like, this was important, this was a missing piece for them.
I'd like to add something, Richard, I forgot. Another resource is our presidents. You know, that Chris Nelson is currently attempting to show the country what we do. And I don't know if I'm giving secrets away, but I think there's no harm in saying that Mike Peters has told me that after he's taken a little bit of vacation from the college, he will try to write something about it. That kind of thing does get heard.
I wanted to ask something about immediacy. It relates to a correction I think I need to make about my talk this morning. And that is, I had said that the sciences were the one place where we were immediately engaged with an object, rather than engaging through a text, through something that someone had written. And I realized that no, it's not the other place. Music is another place. And I wonder then if you can say anything about the relationship between music as immediacy and the experience of nature and science that is also immediacy, and how that relates to what the rest of the things we do are.
That's very wonderfully said. I thought you said it very powerfully. I'm not sure I can add very much more. The immediacy of music and the immediacy of experiences of nature, it seemed to me one of the most powerful sources of wonder. And people can find wonder in text, but often then it takes a careful guiding and shaping of a question to find a place that is very fruitful. But there's a way in which one's so commanded by those things that I think that they're worthy of attention. I think music is also wonderful because it's not only immediate, but then there is the whole, it calls back to music as liberal art. I mean, the mother, as it were, of the practical art, or I don't know where in the family exactly. I mean, these are immortal beings also. They don't die. They keep living on, these gods of ours. And their power remains intact. That is to say, ancient music's sense of the power of the ratios remains undimmed to this day. Why we should hear the ratio 2:1, an octave, and feel something wonderful as opposed to wincing or flinching in some way is to me still incomprehensible. I don't understand it. So I think music is especially powerful because it mediates between the ideal realm and the realm of visible or perceptible, hearable appearances, and in that sense performed a crucial function within the sisterhood of the quadrivium. Creating already a mediation that was probably unstable in ancient times, and it was recognized in various descriptions of the quadrivium, that the relationship between those sisters was quite dynamic. It was not, what does one say, departmental, with all the dreadful and bureaucratic implications. It was a living family, and remains so, I think, to this day.
I want to say, Bill, that you're absolutely right. Namely, as I understood what you said, its books are themselves already mediators. Well, that complicates things, but it makes one thing clear. We shouldn't add another level of mediation.
Yeah, Peter, what's the relation between wonder and difficulty? And what you speak of as courage, does it differ in relation to these two, or wouldn't that?
A very wonderful question, Michael. I'm not sure I can address it, but it seems to me that wonder draws one close enough to something that one can start to experience its full power. And at that point, a sense of difficulty really emerges. I think rather naturally, but very importantly. But the sense of difficulty is a highly dissonant state. The wonder is a kind of That's the kind of immediacy as a romance which people need. You have to love something, I think, to pay any attention to it, to care about it. That's somehow the essential first step. But then after that, you realize that there are things that are difficult, and they are part of the wonder of the thing, but as it were in a minor mode or a dark tonality, it has to be grappled with, it has to be worked through. That they represent not just word strata, but things that are hitting you in the face directly. I mean, that's why I was trying to speak against this Husserlian idea. And at a certain point, it's easier to run away from those things. At a certain, thereby somehow arises the need for a kind of courage to find out, well, why is it that I'm having such difficulty with this X and Y? What is going on? A set of courage that many people, many intelligent and fine people have a great deal of difficulty dealing with, and which is a kind of angel wrestling with whom a blessing might be found. But how to find the courage, if that's the right word, to wrestle with those angels is the question I have.
Yeah, Michael, I've thought about this a little bit. I have a way of putting it to myself, which is that difficulty is wonder that's got down to work. And it's something I actually refer to in my talk.
How about all the way back?
I would just like to make a comment, if I could. It's not really so much a question. We are here celebrating the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Santa Fe campus at St. John's College. And I want to express my appreciation to Eva Brann, who represents those people, Dick Weigel, the other tutors, all of those people who had the courage, the strength, and the willingness to deal with difficulty, and a Dick Weigel who drove across the country in wonderment about this campus. And I want to express my personal appreciation and all of our appreciation to you, Eva Brann, and to those people who were part of the founding of this college. Thank you very much.
In Ms. Brann's talk, you mentioned human beings overcoming the tyrant of time, and you also mentioned circumstance. And when we speak of wonder and difficulty, I think about my own exploration on my own humanity. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about what the value is of learning to understand myself and dealing with that difficulty that comes from looking at myself through not only my own immediate circumstances, but also other people throughout history.
You know, you've given me a large order. And what made you begin by referring to time and circumstance in this? In other words, what did you think the relation was between setting time aside?
I think
Go ahead.
the reason why is because the biggest reason I'm told that I should go to college is because in time that will benefit me for my circumstances. And my circumstances are so defined by the money that I have and the things that I have.
Oh, yeah, I was really talking about a different way of setting time aside, namely of treating the books that we read as not as if, that's the wrong way to put it, treating them as they ought to be treated, namely as being absolutely contemporary. And that doesn't, so one way to, I don't know if this is a way that the question would be asked for you, what good is the reading of these books for my self-knowledge? Is that's one possible way to put it? Yeah. I think of it in two opposite ways. Some books you will read, and suddenly you'll think you found your best friend. Happens to be 2,500 years dead, doesn't matter. I recall, look, I'll give you a very quick anecdote from my own life. I was a history major in college, and then one day I arrived at Yale for graduate school in classics. And by way of preparation, I didn't know what was going to happen to me. I was reading the Phaedrus, and suddenly I thought to myself, that's my book. You know? Which didn't mean that what the book said and what I thought or what the book was about and how I lived were the same, but I found a certain resonance. That's a way of shaping oneself. Then there's the opposite way. You read a book about which you resist all the way. That's just happened to me. I'm teaching seniors, who incidentally, I should say, my senior seminar sends you all their greetings. I'm glad I got that opportunity. We were reading Kierkegaard, being a dutiful tutor. I missed Thursday night's Kierkegaard seminar, but I read it on the plane. And I thought to myself, for the umpteenth time, this is not a book I can resonate to. I don't understand what he's talking about in a deep way. I don't understand what he means by faith, what he means by, he makes a distinction between Socrates, who is a teacher, but claims not to be one, and Jesus, who claims to be a teacher and is one. All this isn't very clear to me, and I don't understand it. I can't exactly tell you why, but it did me a world of good. For one thing, I understood what the limits of my sympathies are. And that's better than having those limits without knowing what they are. But this is a long conversation, and this is only the least of it.
Thank you both so much. That was wonderful. A lot of both of your talks described activities that could be undertaken alone, but they're not undertaken alone. The image or the maxim that the cat can look at the king. I love that. But what happens, I imagine here, what I've seen happen here, is the cat looks at the king and looks around at the other cats. So I just looked at the king. And I said, yeah, you did. I saw it. And so there's a community, both among the students in a particular class and other communities that can be cut up in different ways. And I guess I just wonder if you think of that as a form of mediation or not. We're talking about immediacy. Is the fact that you're looking at each other while you're looking at the spark or the book, is that an exception to this account of immediacy? Is it a kind of mediation, or is it not?
Sparks being referred to.
I think what you've added is essential, and I think when people are trying to understand the ununderstandable or to endure the unendurable, it is only other people, I think, finally, that makes that possible. To me, that seems clear. And it seems clear that what might be impossible to me by myself might be possible when I feel the sympathy, the perplexity, the doubt, the sharing, the very complex polyphony of feelings of the others that are also confronting this thing. And the line that comes to mind is, the Spirit helpeth our infirmities.
This maxim, which I kind of liked, it doesn't, you just showed me the limits, because it means that the cats are the students, right? I mean, that's the way you framed the question. Now, cats are the devil's beasts. They don't like each other. They don't like each other very much. So it doesn't work with the cats. As far as what students give each other is concerned, I often wonder if I had to assign proportions, whether it wouldn't outweigh what goes on in class and even what goes on in study. Now, if the students didn't study, they wouldn't have much to give each other, but insofar as they have read books and the same books, it seems to me what is said in the middle of the night in conversation in dorms or in a coffee shop, that outweighs probably in the end everything else. In other words, this is a community of learning, and it shows in the fact that students can talk to each other because they have the same thing to talk about and do.
So I also have a question on immediacy and the interpretation of text. If the context is bracketed and extraneous questions related to hermeneutics and interpretation, when that's done for scripture, for example, it's called fundamentalism. And so I'm wondering if you can make a distinction between the activity that goes on with the text that we selected here and what might happen in a religious context with scripture.
Well, maybe as a way of starting that, it does seem to me that an experience that we regularly have, I think all of us are here, and I think people having a true discussion, not just here, will have, is that somehow what's happening is more than each individual voice, that at a certain point people have forgotten that point that they came in to say, or their view on a matter, and somehow can be swept away by what's happening in the room, by the thought, the logos that is somehow speaking, thinking through the whole group, even involuntarily. I guess that the spirit is the theological term that I want here. But it seems to me that has a kind of power that even it's not just mediation, but it's capable of sweeping aside even what I was thinking, even who I was, so that I think that's one of the ways in which it's possible for me to walk out of a class thinking and feeling quite differently than I had before, because I was not such a typhonic being that maintained my views, but that things happen, that we are open to each other in a certain way. I don't know. I'd like to start with that.
I think I'd like to complement that by talking about addressing what I thought you were also intending, namely, what does it do to the conversation that the books at least that we read are themselves interpretations? In other words, is that right? Is that what you were interested in?
Well, I think I was on the question of meaning. Like, for example, the earlier question that was asked to you, and you were able to ask back, what do you mean by time and circumstance? And then you were able to clarify your intent as you wrote the text. Now the authors are gone, but we don't have a way of clarifying the intent without trying to build maybe some context or interpret principles, and that applies very strongly to, especially the interpretation of religious texts. So when we bracket that, say, in other texts like Newton or Plato, what is the distinction? It's open. I'm not quite sure what I'm asking. I'm on a panel tomorrow, and I'm getting very nervous.
Maybe a question that I recognize, because it's probably the most difficult question in the realm of what's called hermeneutics, that is to say, the interpretation of texts. Namely, how do we know what it is the author meant if there is an author? As you know, there are people who complicate the whole matter by saying that there really isn't an author. Here's the writing, and the intention, or there may be, in fact, an author, but the intention of the author is not something that we're privy to. And so it's no use asking what did the author mean. We have to ask, what's the text mean? And I have my own take on this, but it's the beginning of endless quarreling, interesting quarreling, I should say. It seems to me that without the faith that the text was written by someone who had an intention, and that author meant me to get that intention, that is to say, to go beyond the literal text to the meaning, and that was meant to be done because he or she is human and I'm human, and words are common and therefore interpretable. I can always ask, what does this mean in itself, and what could he or she have meant by it? Two somewhat different enterprises, and both possible. This is the beginning of the problem, not the answer. But it seems to me that one has to distinguish them, and one has to think about whether one believes, as I do, that there is no reading a book unless one believes that the author is there and has attention. Or to put another way, that the book has a kind of God who sits behind, especially in fictions, who sits above everything and makes things work. If that isn't so, I don't see how we can ever ask, what does it mean, without coming up very quickly against the limit. We have to ask, what did he or she mean, that is the maker of this work? That's where it begins. The rest is, I hope we get some time to talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Christian Chen. I have two questions for each one of you. I agree with the minister back there, gentlemen.
Are you saying you have 4 questions?
I agree with the gentleman back there. Like, I'm proud as a St. John student. I'm really proud of what we do here, and I can't help telling people at my age, you should join us. What we do here is awesome, and we are awesome as well. And my question is for Ms. Brann, is like as a St. John students, like what is the mission for a student or St. John students after they graduate, not only to their individual purposes, but also to the society as a whole? For Mr. Pesic, my question is, I remember President Nelson, he said a few weeks ago that everything important in life is unknown. And we are here as St. John students without any specific job training that cause a lot of tension and anxiety for me. And so, so as a student, like when we graduate here, you know, life has to move on. We have to move to the next chapter. So what kind of confidence we have, or what kind of mind we should hold when we go out of the world? Thank you very much.
So I'm supposed to...
Talk about the mission.
About the mission, But before I do it, give me 2 minutes to tell you an anecdote. I'm allergic to the word awesome. 2 years ago, I was doing freshman. I had a very, very nice young man who sat next to me, and when I lost my place, he showed the old lady where to find it. He used the word awesome all the time. And I said to him, don't ever let me hear you use it again. Came fall, he ran up to me, threw his arms around me and said, Miss Brann, I no longer say awesome. I now say glorious. As for the mission, it seems to me there's, first of all, you're in a very good position to do excellent graduate work, or to go right out and do things. Our students start businesses because they have a general awareness of how things work. They can deal with a great variety of problems and questions. But a large percentage of our students go to graduate school. You're very well prepared. your teachers generally report that the ones who are not afraid of being questioned, that they like the way our students go about it. Your business is to be very good. That is to learn a lot and to become extremely competent. And at the college, I have no great faith in competence, as I said. But outside, you need to have that. That's one thing. That's normal. That's true for all students. The other thing is, you are particularly well grounded in doing one thing that is really missing in the world, in forming small communities, whether it's around the water cooler or in the bistro or wherever it is that the people in your business or your company work, go after work. Someone will wish to talk about something. Mostly they'll be ashamed and embarrassed. You've been taught not to be ashamed and embarrassed to talk about important, large questions. So you're in a position to say, why don't we get together once a month and read a book and talk about it? This is the formation of a community. That's what the world needs, in my opinion. That seems to me a very particular mission for Johnny's.
Yeah, and that seems to me what I would like to say, would connect it to what I tried to say in my talk, is that you will have had a kind of education in courage, that of a kind of moral, intellectual, spiritual sort, which is the most needful thing, especially when facing the kind of difficulties and uncertainties and stresses that you were describing. It seems to me that also having wrestled with the question of genius, which one also realizes here is not so much a person, but a spirit, something that comes from the outside that maybe is sought in certain places. Not like the genius loci, the spirit one feels in certain places. Having wrestled with genius, first of all, and left competence for later, puts one ahead, because the other students I see, they have wrestled with competence, and then they finish their graduate schools, and then someone says, now do something that's extraordinary. Where is the spark of genius? And they feel terrified, because no one has ever, that's been postponed, and the easy thing has been done first. You've addressed the most difficult thing first.
I think we only have time for one more question. And there's a silent person here who has, I think, given a written question. So, Ms. Greer, will you read it?
So this gentleman next to me says, I am recently mute and have been faced with people who simply end the conversation when they discover I cannot speak. Oh, okay. So we began our exploration alone by reading the assigned text. Then we come together in seminar setting to discuss, uncover, hash out, disagree, etc., the resurrection of these great tutors, the books. I am recently mute and have been faced with people who simply end the conversation when they discover I cannot speak. They don't consider that vocalizing is not the only way to communicate. How would you, Ms. Brann, speak to this action? If I am to continue at the college, I will be signing using an interpreter.
Look, as far as most people learning to read signing, that's not apt to happen very soon. Your good friends will do it. But it seems to me the method you just used is perfectly feasible. If you were sitting next to me in a seminar and you wrote down your question or your response, I would read it aloud. That would be the way I would deal with it. And so also in ordinary conversation.
I think we're going to end with that and say thank you to our speakers and thank you to all of you.